Okay, well, welcome back everybody. This is part 2 of the E. Haldeman Julius, the man in his workbook. We left off on page 26. So, okay. Another book by Harris that would alone be sufficient to guarantee his fame is The Man Shakespeare. What an achievement it was, after 300 years of voluminous writing about Shakespeare, that Harris should produce such an original, important study of the man. How intensely human he made Shakespeare. What a breath of passionate reality there is in this book. It is easier to give a man's opinions about particular things, to quote him definitely on things or that phrase of life, that it is to say what he thinks of life as a whole. One studies the particular within narrow and tangible limits, where certain things are agreed upon, and the unknowable is politely forgotten. But the moment one turns to the general, or to the abstract, it would be better to say, one is engulfed by immensity. It is only the man of hard and fixed dogma, whose view of life can be put with ease and certitude. The one thing that can be surely said of the free-thinking mind is that it holds a minimum of certitude. If I say that Haldeman Julius is a skeptic, I have perhaps said little, but I have said nearly all that can be said. He has no lazy, simple view of life, rests himself upon no cheap, comforting illusions, but regards life candidly as a thing of uncertain complexion and issue. A tremendous, treacherous riddle. For the sake of convenience, this earth has boundaries and paths that the sensible traveler may follow. But mist is under and mist above, and no man has ever penetrated this mist. Haldeman Julius is a sensible traveler through life. He follows the paths of work and play that beckon him most urgently, stays wisely within the boundaries of the knowable and the possible, and translates the life about him as solidly and significantly as he may into thought and deed. He is not indifferent to the mysteries of life, as he is a sensitive and reflective being. This mystery colors his thoughts and heightens his feelings of the sublime, yet mocking, tragic, yet comic spectacle of life. It also sharpens his zest for life, fills him with the determination to play out this strange game for all that it is worth. He rarely talks of life in capitals. It is generally some aspect of life that he discusses, seeking to reduce the larger subject to an intelligible scale, to sense a little of the nature of the whole in the contemplation of the part. He sees life in fleeting impressionistic glimpses, in that partial vision which is eternity's only concession to the human intelligence. Thus I recall a brief suggestive talk as we drove along the main concrete road of Giard one Sunday morning in early spring. Haldeman Julius spoke of nature's indifference to the needs of man. These cultivated fields, these fences, this concrete road, so useful to man, so necessary to his comfortable, civilized existence. What does nature care for them? He exclaimed. Let man's hands remain idle for a while, and observe how quickly nature will destroy all trace of his handiwork in a riot of weeds. Nature, in thousands of years, was so little regardful of man's needs that she did not give him a road, not even a simple trail. These splendid fields of wheat, that field of corn, are the products of man's deliberate effort, his bending of nature to his will. Nature left to himself produces weeds. This, I should think, would be the most hearty reflection of man's egotism. But no! Man must persuade himself that nature is working solely for him, that the whole scheme of nature was planned for him by some divine intelligence. He chooses the lesser role. Man's greatest pride should be that he has conquered the indifference of nature, that he has turned his rude, unfriendly planet into a habitable and gracious abode. Man is so far from being a god that he cannot enjoy the thought of his solitary creative triumph, but must hail God and nature as his friends and co-workers. He shrinks from his godlike isolation. He cannot bear to stand alone. Another time, Heidelman Julius spoke of man's desire for a comforting formula. The average man wishes to be told that life is such and such a thing. He demands a belief in definite, plain terms that will at once soothe his fears and satisfy his curiosity. He is afraid to think. He prefers to let others do his thinking for him. Give him a ritual, and he is reassured. Periodically, he mumbles the magic words, and all is well. He can go about his business with his eternal mystery safely tucked into his waistcoat pocket, but all is not quite well. Little doubts creep in. There is perhaps a terrifying glimpse at blankness. And then the formula must be repeated with a special fervor of affirmation. Few are brave enough to squarely confront the mystery of life, to accept the limitations of human knowledge, and to work manfully within these limitations. This is the key to Heidelman Julius's philosophy of life. To do one's work, to stick to one's purpose, according to the best opportunities of life, a sturdy acceptance of human limitations without any relaxation of human effort. It is idle to ask whether this effort will ultimately come to nothing, in some far-off wrecking of things. Within our field of vision, this effort hulks large in importance. Without this effort, life would be meaningless. A man's work is the vital thing, says Heidelman Julius, and if the work is creative, it will bring him to the deepest joy that life holds. While Heidelman Julius is not the man to pass by a single joy of life, or to overlook any interesting thing, his work is the chief and compelling interest of his days, and I might add, with not a little truth, of his nights, for he spends many evenings in his office, and one who is familiar with his habits will first seek him there. He loves the atmosphere of this great book plant, and the creative idea that it embodies, and the long shelves of little blue books, and all this spectacle of productive energy. He feels his most satisfactory hold upon the purpose of life, and interpreted by man, sitting at his desk. Heidelman Julius envisages the steady growth of the Little Blue Book series, a dramatic vision, 1,000 titles, 5,000 titles, 10,000 titles. Who can tell what the end will be? Who can set a limit to the possibilities of this eager life force? In talking of his work, and he is always ready to talk of it, Heidelman Julius puts emphasis upon its fluent nature. It is not fixed within any bounds, but is a thing of constant expansion and progression. When I began to issue the little blue books, he told me, people asked how far I intend to go. They found it hard to conceive of a project without definitive limits. A building was always so many stories high, a road so many miles long. And the little blue books, by analogy, must surely be limited in number. Now that the series is well past the 500 mark, people realize that the little blue books do not present a work of today only, and of a certain number of titles, but a work of the future and of endless possibilities. The work is as boundless as the need for it, as boundless as culture itself. Pardon me. Coffee break. Okay, back at it. If I say that Heidelman Julius's work is always close to the surface of his thoughts, when it is not actually uppermost in them, I do not mean to convey the impression of remarkable or superhuman concentration. The fact is that his work is so immense and so interesting, so varied and picturesque in its suggestiveness, and so richly human, that I cannot imagine him forgetting it absolutely in his waking moments. It is quite natural, too, as the little blue books afford so many great contacts with life, that they should appear in the background of most discussions. I know that with Heidelman Julius, in whatever direction the talk runs, it is interwoven with this or that phrase of the little blue books. A stream of manuscripts comes to his desk. Hardly a day passes that he does not receive a pile of new manuscript, and having carefully read them, a task that he puts first, he is full of enthusiastic talk about them. I always look forward to the meeting with Heidelman Julius with this in mind as much as anything else. There is a thrill in this familiar touching of the source of new ideas. In the glimpse of the first stages of a book's career, this is all the more fascinating when one reflects that these are not books that will find their way only into select groups here and there, but little books that will circulate by the millions, that will meet many minds in their long and useful journey. Heidelman Julius' immediate working environment is very simple. A small office in one corner of the large plant. A business-like desk and typewriter, a filing cabinet, and a dozen shelves of books. He works quickly, with a nervous energy. There are many details of his work which will at once suggest themselves to those who are familiar with the direction of an extensive business that I shall not attempt to describe. The fact is, I don't understand them, and they rather frighten me. The editorship of the little blue books is something that I understand better. This means, of course, continual planning of new titles, as well as keeping a firm grasp on the general purpose of the series. There is always a great deal of correspondence with the writers of the little blue books, the suggestion of new ideas, the weighing of subjects, the critical examination of manuscripts. As a rule, each writer will have work assigned to him for months ahead, and Heidelmann Julius must keep the threads of all his work in his hands. Then each manuscript must be carefully read and edited before it is sent to the printer. And there is the final scrutiny of the proofs before the book is released for the press. The relations of Heidelmann Julius. There it is. With his writers are the freest and most agreeable kind. There is no dictation of subjects or viewpoints. One rule to which Heidelmann Julius very consequently adheres is that a writer shall be given only those subjects which he can approach, not simply with interest, but in a spirit of enthusiasm. He knows that if a man writes about something that does not fully engage his interest, the result will be an uninteresting book. Heidelmann Julius studies the peculiar bent of each writer, discovers his special capabilities, and always assigns his work with a view to getting the best from each writer. Although Heidelmann Julius is full of suggestions, quite often a writer will suggest a subject that appeals to him, and he will be told to proceed with it. As a relief from the editorial supervision, Heidelmann Jules, a photograph. Let's see if we can get it there. Get that. That is Heidelmann. Oops, there we go. I'll get the directions here figured out. That is Heidelmann Julius, as I'm pronouncing it. Okay. Of the little blue books and the 1,001 other details of life in the lively publishing plant, Heidelmann Julius collaborates with Marcet, M-A-R-C-E-T, Marcet, his brilliant and charming wife, in the writing of short stories for the Atlantic Monthly. Home is at the edge of town, a simple 2-story frame building with one of those long, generous fronts, from whose windows a peaceful farm landscape can be seen. This is Heidelmann Julius's escape from life's alarms and annoyances, or rather the library and den serves this delightful purpose. It is this library, with apologies to Marcet's little theater, that chiefly interests me. I could bury myself in it for days on end. I remember Heidelmann Julius told me shortly after this den of books was a thing joyously complete, that he planned to spend a great deal of his time and do a great deal of his work in this sanctuary. But alas for human resolutions, he can't keep away from the office. This library is a long, noble room on the second floor, of course, with books, filling all the walls. Heidelmann Julius has the largest private library that I have been privileged to see. And what a magnificently representative and vital collection of books! The world of literature is here before you, and it will be strange if any book you mention is not found ready to hand. Hence, Heidelmann Julius spends the greater part of his leisure time talking, smoking, reading, and playing his favorite game of chess. He must be a skillful chess player, as he plays with such profound and opaque thoughtfulness. Speaking of chess, I am reminded of a Heidelmann Julius peculiar faculty, tone, that should be very useful in chess, of retiring within himself excluding anything and anybody that, turn the page, anybody that disconcerts him. I have never known anyone else who could so completely shut himself in and lock the doors of his mind against all intruders, even the most friendly intruders. There was a time when this habit of Heidelmann Julius gave me a feeling of uneasiness. I was very self-conscious, and I felt keenly this mental distraction of me to my face, this going off alone with his thoughts. But then I reflected that he had a right to go off by himself. Heidelmann Julius is not one of those fellows of hearty sociability who are hail fellow, well met with everybody, who, as they go down the street, scattering greetings right and left, seem to have just returned to town after a long absence. He is friendly, with a winning manner, and all who meet him like him, but he loves a good measure of solitude, and is intimate only with interesting people. And we have finally reached 2. Remember, we started with 1, and then we have 2. Do you see a little 2 mark there? The story of the Little Blue Books has been told several times in newspaper articles and in perhaps familiar to the reader, but at least a brief outline of the story belongs logically in this sketch, and without such a resume, this sketch would be incomplete. While its inconclusion here will give it permanent form, I can tell this story with accuracy, as it falls easily into a personal reminiscence. I was working with Heidelmann Julius when he first thought of a series of little books as an agency of popular culture. I helped him read proof on the first little books, saw the idea take definite shape, gradually expand in scope and purpose, and grow to a good, healthy size. Of course, I have followed it all along, but this much I was fortunate enough to observe at first hand and behind the scenes. It seems barely possible that this series, which has reached such remarkable prominence and power, is only 5 years old, a little giant in size. And only 5 years old, a mere stripling in years. It is easy to see in retrospect, to see with almost startling clearness, what a sound and broad and timely idea Heidelmann Julius had. I think that few ideas have been so swiftly and sensationally justified. This is not to say that the Little Blue Books instantly carried all before them, that they appeared as a kind of sign from heaven. They had, indeed, to begin with, a friendly reception. They won in a short time a significant prestige, but persistent faith and works cannot be left out of the reckoning when one considers their present success. If the Little Blue Books have inherent popular qualities, they have also been presented to the public in a large way. It was in January 1919 that the first Little Blue Books appeared. Perhaps I should mention, for the sake of strict accuracy, that it was not a little blue book, but a little red book. There were red and green and yellow books, for a time, until finally blue was chosen as the uniform color. There was no fanfare of trumpets to signalize the event. Ideas spring up quietly enough, although they make a great deal of noise once they are actively abroad. Heidelmann Julius spoke to me one day of the question of good literature and the popular taste. He believed that there was a considerable unjustified taste for good literature. In fact, he thought that the best books, if they were made easily available, would be popular in the fullest sense of the word. The classics, for example, had an irresistible human appeal, but they were surprisingly unknown. As he saw it, the average man, the possible reader of good books, demanded two things in a book: that it should be small in size and cheap in cost. Few people have a great deal of time to give to books, and the element of time aside, one knew from one's own experience that even the lover of books, the man of much reading, was often inclined to shrink from a lengthy volume. A small book, too, could be carried about conveniently and would be perfectly adapted to the needs of popular reading. The brightest publishing opportunity and the most important publishing enterprise was calling to the man who would select a really good list of little books and push it vigorously. The upshot of it was that Heidelman Julius saw himself as that man. He had planned quite definitely to begin a series of little books. He had, from the start, the idea of the permanent and ever-growing list. Perhaps he thought at the time that 500 titles was a shining goal, as indeed it was and is. But as the list grew, the thought of it grew, and there was never the slightest notion of stopping it at a certain point. One need not follow the growth of the little blue books title by title, but it is interesting to mention the first two titles, the Rubaiyat, forgive me for the pronunciation, Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, and the Ballad of Reading Gaol, Gaol. Gaol. This was a daring start for poetry, is regarded as among the least popular forms of literature. However this may be, these two titles led the list, and they have proved to be steadily popular. At first, Heidelman Julius confined himself to the classics, but with a difference, a very significant difference from the usual list of classics. He set for himself new standards. He would select not only the more commonly approved classics, he would select not only those more commonly approved classics, those that in one form or another had made themselves fairly well known, but he would also introduce to a large circle of readers the less known, many almost unknown, classics that are to be found only here and there, hidden away in an old bookstore or reposing obscurely in the library of the rare and diligent bookman. Some of these classics Heidelman Julius had in his own library, in costly limited editions, and these he reprinted cheaply for the general reader, released them to the proper use of books that of being read. Such titles, for example, as George Moore's Emporium in Texas, Sarah Helen Whitman's Was Poe Immoral, Francis Thompson's Shelley, one of the inspired essays of English literature, Peggy's Diary, Sir Richard Burton's The Kaddish Houseman's, A Shropshire Lad, to name only a few, are not to be found in the ordinary collection of classics. Heidelman Julius not only interpreted the term classic in a broad and original spirit, but he made his list vitally modern. so that along with the more ancient classics, one finds the works of such writers as Anatole France, Bernard Shaw, Oscar Wilde, Ibsen, Baudelaire, Samuel Butler, H.G. Wells, Havelock Ellis, and George Brands. Finally, in the selection of the series, the aim was to be representative. There should be fiction, drama, poetry, biography, history, science, philosophy, epigrams, books from all the fields of literature. Thus the series was broadly based, generously inclusive, alert to echo fully the various utterances of the spirit of man. It was, of course, indispensable that the list should be individually well selected. A worthy list could be selected only by one who possessed a worthy regard for literature, and who had sound and clear as well as free standards in this respect. Edelman Julius was the ideal editor of such a series. He knew literature, and his general taste, leaving out of the account the subtleties of individual temperament, could not err. Thus originated the series, advanced until there was several hundred titles. Then it entered a new and vital phase. It had been very free and finely critical and thoroughly representative. Now it became creative. This was the way of it. Edelman Julius found that he was hampered in the fields of biography and history and science, of poetry and more general literature. There were innumerable classics that were exactly suited in length to the special requirements of the series, but biography, history, and science were generally to be found in works of quite formidable bulk. It was hard to find short works in these fields that would fit into the series. Obviously, these fields could not be neglected. They were of great importance. They were already represented in the series, it was true, but in nothing like the degree that was desirable and indeed essential. Something could be done, had in fact been done, in the way of careful, intelligent editing, taking the meat and substance of a book without violating the language or spirit of the author. However, this was not enough. The manner in which this problem was solved was natural enough. Really, it was a direct and simple extension of the original idea of these little books. The thing that was clearly demanded was a brief treatment of these subjects. There must be little books on biography, history, and science. As such, little books were not available. They must be specially written for the series. Edelman Julius saw, too, that here was a chance to present these subjects in the thoroughly modern spirit. The past of mankind and the development of human thought could be re-examined and revalued, a creative work of noble propositions and far-reaching possibilities. It had, of course, its adventurous aspect. One might have questioned whether brevity could be employed adequately in these fields. So broad were they, and so imposing was the voluminous tradition. But Edelman Julius was convinced that a man's life, for example, with a solid background of his time, could be well told with fascination, no less than fullness, in a little book. Today one finds among the little blue books brief biographies of Sterne, Addison, Thoreau, Wilde, Swift, Dr. Johnson, Napoleon, Shakespeare. These are names that readily present themselves. There is a biographical history of philosophy not yet complete, and a very important series of little books not simply of scientific theory, but of interesting human narrative. in which is recorded the evolutionary drama of the race. It remains to be pointed out that with all their numerous and striking merits, the little blue books would not have succeeded by sheer virtue. It was necessary that opportunity should knock loudly at the doors of the reading public. In the shape of an enormous and persistent campaign of publicity, one reason why good books have been so neglected in the past is that, for the most part, readers have been left to find these books by accident, as a rule to stumble upon them in a dark corner of an old bookstore. This has not been true of the vast quantity of printed litter such books have been shouted from the housetops. It is Heidelman Julius's single performance that he has shouted good literature from the housetops. He has brought the classics from their academic obscurity into the common light. The appeal of Heidelman Julius to the public in the name of culture has rivaled, turn the page, the most prodigious appeals in the name of commerce. And that is the end of this reading. And we come to chapter 3.